Um, well, greetings to everyone. As we said, for anybody who was here earlier, the meeting is being recorded. We'll get the link for the recorded version to all the organizations who are sponsoring. I'm sorry that pretty much everyone is muted, but it makes such a big difference to the quality of the recording. And because we're using a webinar, which allows for a cleaner picture and fewer little tiny boxes of thousands of people, we are going to take questions tonight through the Q&A as opposed to the chat box. You'll see it down there in a similar spot off to the right, actually to the far right on most people's screens. And we've had a lot of questions submitted in advance. We'll certainly be willing to take others, so plop them in there whenever you want. We'll try to keep questions toward the end because we want to just first sit and listen. Back over to you, Nancy.
Great, thank you very much, Elizabeth. First, Elizabeth Sams and Carol Brady deserve a huge thanks for all the logistics involved with putting something like this on. And Carol always does a phenomenal job with the visuals, which we're so grateful for. And I think most of you know, but 5 groups got together in sort of unusual fashion to host this event tonight. And those groups include the Beaches Activist Movement, of which I am a member, Elizabeth is a member, Carol. Many of us are members of multiple groups, actually, so we won't be pigeonholing everyone. We all have multiple hats. We are one of the people involved with sponsoring this event. In addition, the Beaches Democratic Club, which many of you are very familiar with, is being represented by Joshua Hicks tonight. We have Indivisible Mandarin being represented by Karen Droege, if I had said that right, hopefully. The Jacksonville National Organization for Women is being represented by Judy Shecklin. And we have the League of Women Voters, Jacksonville First Coast, whose president, Linnell Philmont, is representing them. I just want to point out the League in particular, for over 100 years, really has been concerned with voting rights. And really that's at the center of what our speaker is hopefully going to talk about and what we all really care about. And with Amendment 4, we know that 65% of Floridians agreed with the idea that returning citizens deserve the right to vote. I would probably estimate 100% of the people on this call would agree with that. But at any rate, I thought that the League deserved a nod tonight for all they have done for so very long on voting rights. And so I've asked Linnell Philmont, the president of the League of Women Voters, Jacksonville First Coast, to introduce our esteemed, iconic guest speaker tonight, Mr. Desmond Meade. Thank you, Linnell.
Thank you, Nancy, and good evening, everyone. Before I introduce our esteemed speaker, I'd like to address the League's participation in this evening's event. The League of Women Voters remains a nonpartisan organization, and we continue to see the restoration of rights as a nonpartisan issue, as evidenced, as Nancy said, by 65% of the voters who cast a vote to pass Amendment 4 in 2018. Our speaker this evening is a returning citizen himself who has experienced homelessness. He is a College of Law graduate, a father, a husband, an activist, a leader, and was recognized by Time magazine of one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2019. His unrelenting work to reshape local, state, and national criminal justice policies led to his being named Floridian and Central Floridian of the year 2019. He has given testimony in the Florida Capitol before congressional members, was part of a delegation to the United Nations, and has been on just about any and every internet, television, cable, and radio show that will listen to his calls for criminal justice reform. He has a quick wit, an infectious smile, and an energy that has a tendency to invite and even draw others into his vision, his passion, and his work. And we are better because of his efforts. He has become the face of the too often faceless, the voice of those who are too often silenced, and a champion for too many who have had no champion. It is my honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Mr. Desmond Meade. Desmond, the floor is yours.
Nell, I'm glad I had my Zoom on mute. I was like, wow, who is this person you talking about? But I'm glad it's recorded so I could transcribe that and give that to others who are going to introduce me in the future. Say, this is what you need to say. So I really do appreciate that warm introduction, and definitely an opportunity to be able to share some time with everyone that's on the call this evening. The other addition I want to make is I'm also now a new author of the book, Let My People Vote, that was actually released in October of last year. And I'm very proud of this book. And if you haven't gotten it, please go to Amazon to make sure you get a copy of it. And then that way, when I'm in your town, you could always bring it so I could personally autograph it for you. So we're here tonight to talk about, voting. I would like to start with my story because I don't know how many people actually know about me. I'm not going to get too deep into my story because that would be incentive for you to go and get a copy of the book. But typically, I always start, for the most part, in August of 2005, when I was in South Florida, standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. That day I was at my lowest in my life. I was homeless. I was addicted to drugs. I was recently released from prison, unemployed, and the only thing I owned were the clothes on my back. And I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I was ready to end my life, feeling that I let my family and friends down and that I didn't have any worth. And I stood there, and the main thoughts that were going through my head was how much pain I was going to feel when that train ran over my body. But even the thought of, the pain I would have had to endure was not enough to make me move. And I stood there waiting and waiting. But the train never came, and eventually I did cross those tracks, and I checked myself into drug treatment. After completing that, I moved into a homeless shelter. While there, I decided to go to school in the effort to raise my self-esteem and prevent me from using drugs again. And I did real well. I actually enrolled at Miami-Dade College in South Florida. There, I was able to obtain associate's and bachelor's degrees, and eventually I was accepted into FIU College of Law. And in May of 2014, I graduated with a Juris Doctorate degree. But in spite of everything that I was able to overcome to achieve that goal, in spite of the fact that I dedicated my life to really serving the community and giving back, because I lived in Florida at the time, I couldn't vote. I couldn't even take the bar. I couldn't even sit for the bar exam, become an attorney, because I couldn't take the test or apply until my civil rights had been restored. And I have a beautiful wife and family. I had problems even getting a home because it's hard for me to own or even rent a home in a lot of subdivisions until my civil rights have been restored. And so, when we talk about the journey of Amendment 4, it basically started, I believe in 2011, when at the time Governor Scott rolled back the policies of the former governor, Charlie Crist, made it even more difficult for a person to be able to apply to have their rights restored. During Governor Crist's era, folks with less serious offenses were able to have their rights restored automatically, and then everyone else would had to apply to have their rights restored. And during the 4 years of Governor Crist, in 4 years, over 155,000 people were able to have their rights restored. And if you contrast that with the 8 years that Governor Scott was in office, you're looking at less than 5,000 people were able to have their rights restored in those 8 years. And then just to give you a sense of the delay, you know, because I always used to use like a current date. Like I would say, you know, Linnell, if you were a returning citizen under Governor Scott and today was April of 2021, the policies under Governor Scott would require you to wait until April of 2028 before you're able to just apply to have your civil rights restored. And then after applying in April of 2028, you would have to wait possibly till April of 2038 before you see if you had a shot at having a hearing, because it wasn't guaranteed. And if you were lucky enough to get a hearing in April of 2038, when you walked in those doors, you had less than 1% of chance of actually having your rights restored. And primarily because the criteria to determine whether or not you should have your rights restored was non-existent, and that decision was a purely arbitrary decision. To put it even more context, I was recently at a clemency hearing last month, and an attorney, you know, stood up and talked about one of his clients who had applied to have his civil rights restored in 2008. Yet here we are in 2021, and that a client and his client still have not had the opportunity to have a hearing, right? And so when Governor Scott changed these policies and made it even more difficult, you know, knew it was time to do something different. Felt that, you know, to have four politicians um, decide which American citizen get to vote and which American citizen don't get to vote, and have that decision be one that's purely arbitrary. Thought that that was just way too much power for any politician to have in their hands, because of the arbitrariness of it. You know, that leaves a lot of room for partisan politics to play a role in determining who votes and who don't vote. And our stance was, at the end of the day, every American citizen should have an opportunity, whether they look like me or whether they agree with me, they should at least have the opportunity to participate in our democracy. Because the more people that participates in our democracy, we believe the more vibrant it becomes, and that's good for everyone. And so we set out with the Amendment 4 campaign. Um, you know, the experts said it wasn't going to happen. It couldn't happen. But, you know, it was some people on this call believed in it, you know, and back in the days, you know, regardless of the fact that we didn't have any money, there were volunteers throughout the state of Florida, folks from the NAACP and the League of Women Voters and the ACLU and so many other organizations. Indivisible wasn't formed yet, but you guys did play a role in turnout. But, you know, it was just so many folks who, in spite of the odds, you know, knew that this was the right thing to do. And we were able to collect over 1 million signatures across the state of Florida, get Amendment 4 on the ballot. And when we got it on the ballot, we turned people out, and over 5.1 million people voted yes for Amendment 4 in November of 2018. You know, there was a couple of things that I really loved about the passing of Amendment 4 that I think it's so important. One being that, you know, folks tried to label Amendment 4 as a nonpartisan or a bipartisan campaign, and I strongly rejected both of those descriptions. Uh, how I viewed our campaign and what our campaign truly was an organic grassroots effort that welcomed and enjoyed bipartisan support. And the difference with that is that we led with the people, not with the politics. And that was so very important in our campaign. And it showed up that night in November when over 5.1 million people said yes. And that was 1 million more than we had 1 million more votes than our current governor received during that election. And we know that, I think a little over 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for our current governor, which goes to show a broad cross section of support for the effort. But last but not least, I think the most important thing about that campaign, especially on that night, was when I looked at those 5.1 million votes, I didn't see votes that was based on hatred. I didn't see votes that was based on fear. Rather, what I saw was votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And that night in Florida, we showed not only the state of Florida, or this country, but the world, that love can in fact win the day, that we can take issues and we can elevate it above partisan politics, and we can connect with each other along the lines of humanity, and we could move major issues, and we could be successful, and we could push back against the hatred and the fear and the division that's tearing our country apart. And so that was one of the proudest moments that I had in the campaign. And like every good thing, when you get politics involved, it kind of goes downhill real quick. And unfortunately, we had a legislature that was dominated by Republican Party. We had a Republican governor that determined that they needed to draft language to implement Amendment 4. Now, I kind of liken this situation to a made up story in my head. That you have this family that been homeless for quite some time, and politicians would walk past this family, every single day and see their suffering, and knowing that they're out there in the elements, rain, sleet, and snow, and they never lift a finger to help that family. But one day, the citizens of the community came together, and they decided that they were going to build that family a home. And no sooner as they finished building the home, here came, here comes the politicians wanting to demand to be the ones to determine how the home is furnished. And that's what we've seen with Amendment 4. That the policy of disenfranchisement has been within this state for 150 years. 150 years. And the legislature did nothing. And we, the people, people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, came together in I think it's the second most purest form of a display of democracy. First being voting, but the second being when citizens can come together and engage in the ballot initiative and say, you know what, you politicians had your chance. Uh, Apparently you can't handle it. So we're going to take matters in our own hands, and we're going to make the change that we want to see. And Florida voters said that, and they did that. But these politicians came in and wanted to determine what we meant, what we really wanted to do. And as a result, the output was Senate Bill 7066, which basically created these legal financial obligations that over 773,000 people would then have to pay before they're able to enjoy the benefits of Amendment 4. While that was disheartening, my organization do not believe we're not cut of the cloth where we're going to bitch and moan about things and we're going to give up and we're going to walk away. What we knew we had to do was just roll up our sleeves and keep pushing forward. And we have a saying, where other people see obstacles, we see opportunities. And what we seen was, number one, we're good in math. And the math tells us that if 1.4 million Floridians benefited from Amendment 4, right, in spite of the fact that the legislature had created these laws that required the payment of outstanding legal financial obligations that impacted 774,000 individuals, there's still 600,000 that's out there returning citizens who don't have legal financial obligations who are eligible to register to vote right then and there. And so we had a three-pronged approach. Number one, seek out returning citizens who did not have outstanding fines and fees and get them registered to vote. Number two was to create uh, uh, um, a campaign around fines and fees in which we were able to engage in the other two prongs, which was number one, using the courts to get those fines and fees waived, and whatever judicial circuit was willing to work with us to make that happen. And the other prong, number two, was to raise money and to help people, because we knew that a lot of the people who had these legal financial obligations were too poor to pay them. And we didn't think that uh, any citizen should not be forced to choose between paying their rent or their mortgage or voting. No one should have to choose between putting food on their plate or their dinner table or voting. And that access to the ballot box should be free and unencumbered. And so that is exactly how we approach these fines and fees roadblocks. And last year we was actually able to raise over $27 million and pay out over $27 million, which helped over 44,000 of those individuals be able to not have that roadblock in front of them. And of course, with operating under those three prongs, I'm so happy because, I think in spite of the pandemic, over 89,000 returning citizens were registered to vote. They had some other returning citizens that was registered prior to the passing of Amendment 4. And what we saw with over 100,000 returning citizens actually show up at the polls. 75% of them voted early, and they didn't come alone. They brought their family members, and over 177,000 of their family members who never voted before in their life showed up during the presidential election and cast a ballot for a grand total of over 278,000 people. And so that was a very, for me, a very proud moment. But during the election, I also had some heartbreaks. I had some moments that strengthened our resolve to continue. In August, during the August primary, I had voted for the first time in over 30 years in the August primary. And I can tell you that when I was walking up to my polling location, I remember thinking about how I was actually walking on hollowed ground. And that was because I was thinking about all of the sacrifices that was made, the blood that was shed so that I could have the opportunity to exercise my right to vote. I thought about my ancestors who were hung on trees, who was burned, bitten by dogs, sprayed with fire hoses, and terrorized. All of the atrocities and the danger that they had to face so I could have an opportunity to vote. And I also thought about the hundreds of volunteers from Jacksonville to Pensacola, all the way down to Key West, who just sweated blood, sweat, and tears, just went all out, in our campaign to collect petitions and to turn people out in support of Amendment 4. And lastly, I thought about the 773,000 people who were not going to be able to vote when I was walking up to that polling location. And when I got there and I went in the voting booth, I got my ballot and I started circling my candidates. I realized I just had a moment where I realized that what I was doing, what I was engaging in, really transcended the partisan politics. It transcended even the implicit racial bias. That the act of voting, what I was actually doing, had elevated me to a place that said something so simple and pure and powerful. It said that I am. I realized that as I was voting, I wasn't voting as a Democrat. I wasn't voting as a Republican. I wasn't voting as an African American. That I was voting, I was committing this act that was actually legitimizing or verifying my existence, my humanity. It said that I exist, I am, that I am a part of this society, that my voice do matter, that I can make a difference. And that was such an amazing feeling, and in spite of the fact that I've been an activist all those years, I didn't realize how impactful the act of voting truly was. And in spite of my yearning, I still didn't fully comprehend the yearning of others to want to be participants in democracy. I remember countless times during the campaign, people, I remember this one lady, Miss Ann, she would always tell me, man, Desmond, I hope I get my right to vote back before I die, you know? And I thought that was, that was special, but I didn't realize the depths of that until after I voted and had that experience. And then maybe a week or two later, I'm getting a text from one of our volunteers about this woman named Miss Barber, who, she was given 6 months to live. And as we was registering to vote, she, was crying. And, she had our organizers starting to cry too. And when they asked her, why are you crying? And she was like, I've been trying for over 24 years to be able to vote, right? But because of my conviction and because of my drug addiction, I had believed that I would never be able to. But for over 24 years, I've been trying to vote. And here I am right now in my house filling out a voter registration form. And this is just so real, surreal. And when she finished and she signed her name on the voter registration form, she looked up and she asked our organizer, canvasser, if she would pray that God would allow her to live long enough to cast a ballot. Now, when I heard that story, it hit me right in my heart. And I was just blown away because I thought I knew about wanting to vote. But here we had this woman who was given 6 months to live. And her dying wish was not to visit an exotic location or to meet a celebrity, or do something extravagant. Her dying wish was just to be able to get to feel what it felt like, just to experience voting, being a part of society and feeling like your voice mattered. And her story just really just hit me so hard, man. I just started telling everybody about it. And I remember a reporter asked me to find out if she wouldn't mind sharing her story. And I told the reporter I would look into it. And when I reached back out to her, I discovered through her family that 2 weeks after registering to vote, her health took a turn for the worse and Barbara died. She died before getting that one thing that she yearned for more than anything else, to be able to vote. And I wonder how many people are out there in our community that have that desire. I've ran across so many, but I never knew the depths of it until I met Barbara. And when I found out she died, it broke my heart. And, from time to time when I think of her, it brings tears to my eyes. And I get emotional talking about Barbara because so many people take voting lightly, take our democracy lightly. And sometimes we, and this is not a knock on anyone, but sometimes we even devalue the right to vote when we engaging in this partisan bickering and back and forth and turning voting into them versus us instead of an expression of how we thrive in a democracy. And we either minimize or devalue voting, but there are people out there that don't want to die without being able to do that. That they, for some reason or another, understand how valuable the right to vote is and how special it is. And Barbara really drove that home for me and really strengthened our resolve to go out there and, in spite of the obstacles, engage returning citizens and get them to engage others, people who are registered but don't vote, or people who are eligible to register to vote but don't think it's worth their time. We're engaging any and everybody that we can. Pandemic be damned. We're doing it. And we went out and we throughout the state of Florida, we ended up hiring over 1,300 people. And I'm proud to say none of them, we had no cases of COVID. We had strict protocols, but we knew we had to engage, and people showed up. And in November, on early during early voting, you know, me, Desmond Meade, I voted in my very first presidential election ever, and I'm over 50 years old. I've never ever voted for a president, but I got my chance. And I think about people that we ran across from in Pensacola, in Panama City, in Miami, Florida, in Belgrade, in West Palm Beach, people that we ran across in their 60s and 70s and even 80s who was never able to vote because they lived in Florida. But this presidential election was the very first time in their lives that they had an opportunity to cast a ballot. And just like their tears rolling across my cheeks, there was so many folks that had tears just flowing from their eyes. And when you looked in their eyes, you seen a heightened level of excitement, right? And vibrancy there, because people felt so alive and they felt like they were finally a part of something special. You know, and I understood why they felt the way they felt, because I experienced it myself. And that experience just tells me that at the end of the day, we have to figure out, how are we engaging in such a way, right? How are we engaging other people, right? People who have given up on the system, or people who have refused to pay attention and participate, or people who are barred from participating. How are we engaging them? How are we fighting to create a community in which people are desiring and wanting to participate in elections, as opposed to feeling like they have to, right? How are we promoting this thing called democracy, right? That in spite of the fact that we may not look alike, in spite of the fact that we may not agree on everything, right? In spite of the fact that there are differences, that we have differences of opinion, or we come from different backgrounds, the one thing that we will always recognize is the humanity in each and every one of us, and the need for each and every one of us to participate in our democracy to make it more vibrant and better for us all. How do we engage in that? Even with the recent, you see the onslaught of voter suppression legislation that's out there. How do we respond to that? Well, I can tell you that we have decided to respond to suppression with aggression. That if there's anyone that's trying to block access to participating in our democracy, if there's anyone that's trying to minimize the amount of people that can vote, that we respond to it by increasingly registering even more people and turning out even more people, paying off fines and fees and removing these obstacles of even more people. and just spreading this message that democracy is something that needs to be expanded and celebrated, not suppressed. And so that's what we're doing. And so I'm looking forward to the questions that you all may have, and to any discussion about some of the things that we're doing now in the state of Florida, in ways that people can help us out. But first and foremost, let me thank you all once again for inviting me. I hope I didn't talk too long, but I consider it an honor to have this opportunity to just share some of myself with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Meade. That was incredibly moving. I love how you refer to this as, based on humanity, because that 65% of Florida agrees with you. That's what is so hopeful, I think, moving forward, that if the politicians and the hyper partisans would get out of the way, I think people are deep down still good, right? So I have the honor of speaking first. My name is Dr. Nancy Stotts. A lot of you know me, but welcome and thank you to everyone who is joining us on this call tonight. I know you touched on briefly what happened with Amendment 4 after it passed, and then there was the further changing and requiring the fines and fees, as you called it, how the house is going to be furnished, more like putting a big tax on the house really before they even moved in. And then Judge Hinkle, after the lawsuit came from the ACLU and Cecile Schoon was involved in that, did come out and say it's not right that you can't even tell these folks what they owe, and that the default position is that you can't register. So then again, our governor sought legal action at a higher court, who came down and said, no, we disagree with that. Has anything happened since then that would give us hope, or are there any recourse? And is there any recourse at this point from your position? How would you say, where do we stand on that?
Yes. So thank you for that question, Nancy. The plaintiffs had the opportunity to, I guess, theoretically appeal the decision from the 11th Circuit, but they would have had to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think probably the political climate, makeup of the court may have played a role in them deciding not to do so, not to pursue it any further.
Yeah.
But it's that doesn't mean that future challenges won't arise. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we just have to work. We have to work with what we have right now. And I don't know if you want to call it a saving grace, but one of the things that we were, because we knew, when we passed Amendment 4, we knew that the House and the Senate was basically supermajority Republicans in both. And so the Senate president wanted implementation legislation. The Speaker of the House wanted implementing legislation, and the governor wanted it. And so if you have the leadership that want it, and you have basically a supermajority in the House and the Senate, guess what? It's going to happen.
Yeah. And
so what we did was we decided could we roll up our sleeves and just dive in there. And we matter of fact, we spent a lot of time with Cecile in Tallahassee as well. And we just rolled up our sleeves and see how we could minimize the damage. And one of the ways that we were able to minimize the damage was by ensuring that there was a provision in there that would allow the courts to actually weigh in and waive a person's fines and fees. And so basically a person anywhere in the state of Florida can petition the court in which they had their conviction and ask the judge if they would waive their fines and fees. And the judge has the authority and the power to do so. There were a couple of judicial circuits primarily Dade County and Palm Beach County, in which we were able to actually put together some programs that would allow for a collaboration between the state attorney, the public defender, the clerk of courts, and the courts themselves to actually create a process where people can have their legal financial obligations waived or converted to community service hours. We're very hopeful because more circuits are now on board and are setting up systems, and hopefully we can get this implemented throughout the state. One of the things, though, that we also looked at the governor and the clemency board who have the power to fully embrace the spirit of Amendment 4. They made some effort last month when they revised their policies. Because here, remember, right? So here's the deal: when Amendment 4 passed, Amendment 4 only dealt with voting rights, right? Not with the complete civil rights. And then, of course, the right to bear arms, that's totally separate once you lose it. But so even though Amendment 4 passed, and I got the right to vote back because of Amendment 4, I still couldn't sit for the Florida bar because my civil rights were not restored. And I still, I mean, as early as a year ago, I was struggling trying to find a place to live.
Mhm.
I make decent money. My wife makes decent money. We can get a nice, place for our kids. But every time we find a good house, just so happens that, because my civil rights have not been restored, that I'm not even allowed to even rent. Right. And so I had a difficult time finding housing. And so with this change in the clemency policy that occurred last month, basically what it said is that if anyone qualifies for Amendment 4, they automatically qualify to get their rights restored. Right. And so that's a victory for people like me that will help the process. Now, what the governor could also do is say that they don't have to worry about paying legal outstanding financial obligations because the clemency board already does that, right? It did it for far back as I could recall that you did not have to pay outstanding, you didn't have to pay the court costs and the fees and the fines before you could apply to have your civil rights restored and get them restored. Right. And so the governor could have easily embraced it. And so we hope that we can push the governor, or if there's a new governor next year, at the end of next year, get a governor that would embrace the spirit of Amendment 4. So that's an alternative path that we could explore.
Yes. Thank you so much. And you answered my second question already about the fines and fees and the ability of judges to vacate those, which I don't know what we could do as citizens, but that would be fantastic. But even better would be a new governor. Thank you. I'm going to now have Joshua Hicks from the Beaches Democratic Club ask you a question. Thank you.
Hey, Desmond, it's an honor to be here with you today.
Hi, Joshua.
My name is Joshua Hicks. Like Nancy said, I'm the vice president of the Beaches Democratic Club here in Duval County. Hannah Moore is also on this call, and she's the president of the organization. Our focus is to encourage voter registration here in Duval and voter turnout for our elections, especially here in the Beaches area, which isn't as friendly to voting rights as we would want it to be because of the registration of people's political parties. So my question for you is how can we as a democratic organization and progressive organizations on this call today, how can we reach out to returning citizens to not only register them to vote, but also make sure they're turning out to vote? Are there publicly available lists for this type of outreach? And what's our best strategies to make sure that come November of 2022, all returning citizens can vote and then we have a new governor?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Josh. I had that question posed to me at least, I would say 50 times within the first week after the passage of Amendment 4. And it did create some type of frustration. I know that it meant well, but here's the deal. Let's see if I could create this scenario, right? Because I remember first said, where can we find them? And uh, basically the question is, where do you think they are,
Mhm.
right? And if nothing else, what Amendment 4 tells you, right, is
Mhm.
that returning citizens are where you are,
Mhm.
right? They're in our churches, they're in our
Absolutely.
congregate, our workplace, they're at the malls, at the supermarkets, they're in some of them are in our homes and definitely in our communities. They're just everywhere, and it would be and I remember this one lady, she wanted to go like at a mall and put a table out there. You know how we like the table events, right? Have this big old sign to say, hey, felons, register here, right? Which that was like number one, the term was a very derogatory term, right? And that's why we using the word returning citizen. But number two is that having a felony conviction is still to most people a badge of shame, right? And so to have something out there saying, hey, all felons or all returning citizens come here to register might not be as inviting as people would want it to be. At the same time, there were, when we passed Amendment 4, there were over 3 million people in Florida who was eligible to register to vote who were not returning citizens that were not registered to vote. And there were 1.4 million returning citizens. And so the question is, do you spend time trying to find just 1.4 million returning citizens, right? Or do you continue or ramp up your voter registration efforts, right? And within those, what I explained to you is that if you're tabling and you're going around and asking people to register to vote, you do it. You don't have to ask anybody anything, but at some point you will run into a returning citizen. Somebody's going to tell you, "Oh, I can't register because I have a felony conviction." Now, with the passage of Amendment 4, you can say, au contraire, you can register. Let me ask you a couple of more questions, right? And so it's not necessarily going out to find them, but knowing that you will encounter them. And so the key question is, what do I do when I encounter returning citizens doing my voter registration efforts, right? And that would be the answer. I would say was to be the I would, if you can capture their information, that's great, but I would direct them to the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, where we have people that are thinking about this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and could answer whatever kind of questions. Because sometimes there are little nuances to these questions that, if we're not careful, we could send someone in the wrong direction, and it could be catastrophic, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're protecting folks and not leaving them open for attacks. Because folks, there are some people out there that's ready to attack, right, and looking
Absolutely.
to do so. And so, yeah, that's what I would tell you, Joshua. And the other thing too, let me, if I may, so like I said, I took about at least 50 calls that first week, and the thing that really started like it was that itch I couldn't scratch, right? It was nagging at me. And then maybe about a week or two later, right, when I started finding myself getting agitated and angry, it was because how we engage folks. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So folks call it, where do you have a list? Can we find these return? And then one of the things that they would say, man, if Amendment 4 would have passed earlier, Andrew Gillum would not have lost, right? He lost by 30,000 votes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And man, they were like, they were saying, we want to make sure this never happens again, right? And so let's go and get these returning citizens registered. But what was happening was that because folks were so aggressively seeking out returning citizens, it made me feel as if there was a target on my back, right? That returning citizens are now basically being targeted. And the approach had me feeling, you ready for this? It was actually dehumanizing to me because now I was nothing but a token in some partisan battle, right? And you didn't care about me because of who I am or how I can contribute to democracy. You cared about me because you want to make sure a person like Andrew Gillum don't lose again, and that Democrats will finally win the state of Florida, right? But it took away that feeling, right? And I didn't realize it, right? Because remember, this was something that I experienced before I even voted. But you remember what I talked about when I was in that voting booth, how it took me to that place and said, I exist, that I'm somebody. But when I'm putting one-on-one together and seeing, yeah, you're just looking at me because you want me to be counted in your number. All of that created a transactional atmosphere. So even if you was able to register someone, that person is walking away with the feeling like you don't give a damn about them, right? And where's their excitement, or where's that entry point to getting them to be at least curious about democracy and being civically engaged? And so, you know, I started to understand that even though we may be registering people, we still have to battle voter apathy. And part of that is making sure that the first encounter with a prospective voter is not a transactional encounter, but rather a more transformational encounter. I want to talk to you about how you can participate in democracy and what it means to add you, right, to the role of people who are out there voting, right? That my number one priority is not that you vote the way I vote, but that you are voting, right? And let them know that there are some concerns that you have and how participating could address those concerns. You could be a part of the solution, whatever you think the solution is. How do we engage people like that, right? And I do believe, you know, we had over one group, we had over 64% of people turn out, first-time voters that we engage with, man. That's darn good. And part of that is that we did not want to engage in transactional encounters. So I know I probably more than answered your question, but you triggered.
No, it's an amazing answer, and you're 100% right. We should be celebrating voter registration, celebrating the ability to vote. It's never about a transactional process. It's about lifting up our democracy and making sure everyone has that right to vote. So that's an amazing answer. Real quick, if I have time for one more question. So, you know, last year the Republicans threatened to sue those third parties who were, you know, paying court fees and fines, implying that it was buying votes. Do you know what ever happened with that? Did they follow through with those threats?
So first of all,
yeah,
those threats was purely political, and it was meant to, I think, create a chilling effect on the work that we were doing. That came about because Mike Bloomberg had a conversation, or his team had a conversation with newspapers and saying that they were giving all this money to fines and fees. And in that same article, he's talking about how, you know, he's going to do everything to make sure that Biden wins the campaign or Trump loses or something like that. So the reality was we never got a penny from Mike Bloomberg, right?
Yep.
And I know that some folks have said, "Oh yeah, Bloomberg never got a penny from him," right? And so there was nothing there even to investigate. Period. Right. The other thing was that there is no quid pro quo in what we were doing. You know, at the end of the day, what we were doing was allowing people the opportunity to not have to face the dilemma of choosing between putting food on their table or voting, right? We were removing obstacles So if a person did want to go vote or register to vote, that they had the ability to do so.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. And I believe folks, if they want to donate, can go to the FRRC website. And
Yes. And let me tell you,
that helps.
over 90,000 people, you know, and I kind of was pissed off at at Bloomberg, right? And people like Bloomberg, right? That want to run their mouth and say, "Oh, look at what I'm doing," or whatever. First of all, that little bit of money that he falsely claimed that he donated was nothing but a drop in the bucket. If Bloomberg wanted to, he could have taken 10% of his fortune and would have paid everybody fines and fees off, right? And so what it did though, and what pissed me off, right? And people who know me know that I'm like grassroots and I push back against a lot of the political gamesmanship. I'm not with that. What pissed me off was the fact that over 90,000 people, right, gave money, man. People like you, Josh, and Nancy, and Linnell. I'm not saying that you all actually did, but just regular everyday Americans from across this country was given like 100 here, 200 there, and that was the beautiful thing about it. And you want to come and overshadow the beauty, right, of citizens coming together to free democracy in Florida, right, with a false claim that you never made good on, that a claim that you never made good on, right? Because you want it to be about you or whatever, and that really infuriated me because once again, you had politics trying to trump the people, right? And what I've seen is that when you put people above everything else, right, even above your politics, man, that great things can happen. I really believe it. Nancy, it was something that you said that reminded me, Joshua, you're in Duval County, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yes. And you're riding down 95, you're going to Daytona Beach, you're getting ready to go surf, right? Because you don't like the waves in Duval. So you're going to go to Volusia County to surf, right? And as you're going down 95, you see an accident ahead, Joshua. You decide you're going to stop. You pull over to the side of the road. You get out your car, right? You run up to the scene and you see someone laying on the ground. Your first question is not going to be, did you vote for Donald Trump? It's not going to be, what's your immigration status? What's your sexual identity? How much money you make? No. It's going to be, are you okay? How can I help? Right? And it's those type of moments that I am fighting so hard to create. We shouldn't have to wait until after a natural disaster. We shouldn't have to wait until we come across some kind of calamity for us to operate in an environment that we rightfully should be operating in, where we see each other's humanity, right? That matters more than anything, right? It matters more than your politics, right? That we see another human being in need. It's in those moments that we see humanity at its best. It's in those moments that our community, our country is actually great. That's when we see the greatness of this country, when we could just come together in spite of the differences of our skin color or our socioeconomic status or our sexual identity. None of that matters. What matters is that we see in each other another human being that's worthy of being treated with dignity and respect. And it's when the politics come in that creates this divide and have us hating brother, almost reminiscent of the Civil War.
Amen.
Excuse me for preaching.
Thank you so much. Nancy, back to you.
Yes, so next up for representing Jacksonville National Organization for Women is Judy Shecklin. If you want to introduce yourself briefly. Thank you, Judy.
Certainly. I'm so inspired that, sort of hard to put words together, but the National Organization for Women is the largest women's organization in the world. We've been fighting for voting rights and, of course, suffrage before 1920. And we have been a part of the struggle for Amendment 4, collecting signatures to put, to get that ballot initiative before the public, as well as doing voter registration. And I think one of the things that was so inspiring to me doing voter registration is hearing stories from people who were returning citizens about the frustration and pain of not being able to vote, despite all of the things that they were doing in their lives that were putting them on a path of so much success, not feeling as if they were a part of our democracy. So I really applaud your work and would like to certainly know what we can do to remove those barriers. Currently, this legislative session, there's an excellent bill. Tadeo and Chambliss, are sponsoring it in both the Senate and the House, the voting rights restoration. Sadly, the bill has not really gotten past the first reading. So my question to you is, what can we do as far as, turning this around and removing these barriers? Is it, lobbying legislators? It's feeling very, just sort of not fruitful at this point. Letters to the editor, letting people know, using stories. And where do we find stories like yours that are really compelling to change people's minds and really have them have the impact to remove these barriers to voting? Social media campaigns, petitions, what do you see as most effective to be able to really educate the public so that we can, be so many voices across all political factions? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Judy. You gave me a mouthful there. Let me start by saying, I don't know if you remember when you all had the your convening or your conference in Southeast Florida. And I remember driving all the way down, I think it was like Sarasota or Fort Myers, to speak to your organization and to ask you all to help collect petitions. And sure enough, you all did. And so thank you so much. That was in 2014, I believe. But what can you do? Do what I did. Launch a ballot initiative. I know it sounds crazy, but that's where I was at, because I know that I've been a part of FRC. I joined when it was part of an email listserv that had multiple organizations a part of it. I think FRC was officially, it was brought together in 2003. I joined in 2006 and became the steering committee secretary at my first convening, and maybe about 3 years later becoming the president. Oh, hold on. Let's see. Could you guys give me 1 second? 1 second.
We're having brief technical difficulties.
It wouldn't be a webinar without it, right?
Exactly. Okay, here
Now
we come.
we see it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. How about that? All right, we're back. Lost connection for a second. But as I was saying, in that process, I've seen how we engage the legislature and how we lobbied the clemency board. And the clemency board is comprised of the governor, the chief financial officer, the attorney general, and the secretary of agriculture. And so we lobbied them, and we lobbied the legislature, and we spent a lot of resources, and we've seen how easy it is for even great things to just not even see the light of day. Unfortunately, that's how our politics have gotten. It's actually worse now. And so there's little to no hope that something that you want or the people want will actually get through anything, right? But we still have ballot initiative process here in Florida, and that is definitely an avenue. And then, I think another avenue, we talked about it earlier. Another avenue is choosing different leadership, leadership that would embrace values that you cherish. And part of that process of making that happen is going out, and engaging voters or new voters and getting folks registered and getting folks turned out. When you see these voter suppression laws that are being implemented, right? It's designed to just nip at the edge, at the fringes, right? Of people who are voting. They say, okay, there was a spike there. Let's do this. Let's nip and tuck here. That's why I say we respond to suppression with aggression, because there are too many of us, right? For them to be able to stop, right, with these suppressions. If if they want to suppress, then we just turn out even more and just overwhelm the hell out of them, right? And then sweep those suppressors out of office, because it's more than just suppressing the vote. To me, when I look at it, it's more than just denying access to people of color. It's about, man, a direct and blatant attack against democracy. That's how I look at it, right? And people ought to be held accountable. And how do we hold politicians accountable? In the voting booth. We hold them accountable there, right? And so we have to believe that we can do it. But the thing about it that we have to understand, it's not going to be easy. That it's going to take sacrifices. It's going to take long nights and long days, but it's going to take a considerable amount of effort. And the other part of your question is not only, more than just calling your elected official. I don't put too much faith in that, on things that really help people. What I put a lot of faith in and what I've seen work was to have a conversation with your neighbor, right? One of the things that folks would try to make you believe, whether it's the media or just how society is that there are some people that you can't talk to, right? And we enter into an effort already limiting who could talk to us and who we could talk to, right? Amendment 4 didn't do that. Amendment 4 created a space to where we were able to talk to anyone. When I got the first petition off of the printer, the first place I went was in Brevard and Volusia County, right? And I approached, it was during election season, and I approached people who were wearing Adam Putnam shirts or Rick Scott shirts, right? I approached conservatives to get them to sign my petition. And I could tell you that when we were qualifying for the Supreme Court review, the first 2 congressional districts that qualified were conservative districts. District 1 and District 8, right? And so I was very intentional with that. And what I find out is that when you talk to your neighbor, that person down the block from you, right? That you're going to find out that you have more in common than the things that divide you. And then you're able to talk to them just even in that space with the things that you have in common, and you could move them. And it's not about I'm trying to convert you to a Democrat or convert you to a Republican or whatever. It's about I want to connect with you as a human being, and these things that we talk about. How are we getting engaged? How are we participating in democracy to address those things? And I think that just having that conversation with people, I think, is more transformative than trying to have a conversation with a politician who don't give a damn about what the people want. And we've seen that. I'm going to say this and shut up because I don't want to preach too much. But I believe, and it's just my opinion, not the opinion of my org, but my personal opinion, that the COVID pandemic did 2 things that I thought was great. Number 1, it really showed people how voting is literally the difference between life and death, right? It did. Not with the pandemic, with police shootings, the whole 9 yards. It showed people that the power of the vote can be the difference between life and death. The other thing I think that it showed folks, I think this pandemic really showed that there is a distinction between a politician and a public servant, right? And it showed, we've seen it play out, that when politicians are involved, that this country gets even more divided and people die. But when public servants are involved, right? We have an opportunity to come together as a country, as a community, and people have a chance of living. And the difference, the one thing, and I wouldn't even say the one thing, right? But one of the things that distinguishes a politician from a public servant is that a public servant would at some point take heed to the cries of the people and would place their needs even above their own politics. While a politician will ignore those cries. We've seen it with this gun control debate. We've seen it at a time when at one point, I think there was a poll where over 90% of Americans was in favor of sensible gun control, but did the politicians even want to pay attention to that? No, they ignored that and just was led by their donors and their lobbyists. That's a politician, right? A public servant is going to be, regardless of what their political party is, when the cries of the people are so overwhelming, they would take heed to that. And they would place precedence over addressing the needs of the people.
Well,
So that's what I think. And I think that what we need to do is to be able to distinguish between a politician and a public servant. To me, that's more important. I'd rather have more public servants, regardless of what party they belong to, than a whole bunch of politicians that's in the party that I'm in. I'd rather have people who are in office that first and foremost give a damn about people first.
Thank you. That was very well put. I would like to give Linnell an opportunity to ask a question on behalf of the league next.
Sorry about that. Just a little trouble unmuting myself. Desmond, mine is a little bit more of the business side of the house. I apologize for that because we've had such a great emotional conversation here this evening. But so when we talk to folks about the fines and fees program, some of the questions that we get, people want to know is, how does your organization determine which fines and fees that they'll put money towards? Is it the amount of the fine or fee? Do you start out with the smaller ones as opposed to the higher ones? Or is it by the probability that the returning citizen will actually vote once they get their rights restored? Or, I mean, is there an equation? Can you share with us how that happens?
And definitely one of the equations definitely is not about the probability of them voting. All right, let's get that out the way early, right? This is how we make out of the. First of all, what we do is that we encourage people to actually sign up. They can go to our website to sign up, apply to the fines and fees program. Once we do that, then we would actually make an analysis of each individual. One of the first things that we want to find out is whether or not they actually qualify. Do they have any disqualifying offenses? What we'll find is that there's actually a small percentage of them that fits into a category of, listen, we've had people who applied for the fines and fees program that didn't even have a felony conviction, right? And part of one reason is because they had a felony charge, but it was downgraded to a misdemeanor. So they never lost their right to vote. And they thought all this time, they thought they couldn't vote. Then you had folks who was found guilty of a felony, but the adjudication of their guilt was withheld. So they never lost the right to vote. And then you had people who were convicted, but they don't owe anything, right? And so we're able to weed those people out. And so for those folks, it's like, hey, you guys, you're good to go. If you want to register to vote, listen, here's how you can register to vote, whatever. Right. So then we're left with the people who do have an adjudication of guilt, do not have a disqualifying offense, right? But they owe something, right? Then we will work with the clerk of courts. We have attorneys that have volunteered their time pro bono that are law students as well, and they would actually go through that person's file to make a determination of what they owe. Right. Once that determination is made about what they owe, as a general rule that is not like written in stone. We try to maximize because Judy, I know you about at the end of this call, right? And you, Nancy, and probably Linnell is going to each write a check for $1,000, right? For our fines and fees program. Linnell probably do 2,000, you know, right, Linnell? So Linnell writes a check for 2,000. Judy and Nancy and Elizabeth, you write a check for $1,000. That's $5,000, right? That money comes in. By the way, it's all tax deductible, and basically all of that money goes strictly for fines and fees. It doesn't cover overhead or anything. There's a 1% processing fee that a fiscal sponsor uses, but that's it. So that $5,000 come in, and we have 5 people, right? 5 people that's on the waiting list. And 3 of those people have outstanding legal financial obligation of $900 each. The 4th one have outstanding financial obligations of $1,000. The 5th one has an outstanding obligation of $4,500. What do you think we're going to do, Linnell? We're going to get as many people as we can possibly get, right, engaged with what you was able to give us. We want to maximize our donors' dollars. You know, you gave to help people, and if we could take what you can give us and help 2 people, that's what we're going to do, and we're just going to work our way up. But that is how we make that determination, right? And the other thing is whether or not there's a robust system in that person's county in which we can get them in front of the courts. Because if we can get them in front of the courts, then we can spend the money elsewhere. The thing that we don't know, is we don't even ask the question. We don't even know what their race is, right? When you go through, if you go to our website right now, you would see the only thing we need to know is your name, some personal information, and where you got your conviction, right? And contact information and where you got your conviction. That's all that matters to us right there, right? And then the other piece to that is that we do focus because we want to approach this through an equity lens, right? And so we know that there are communities that have suffered the most from racism. There's communities that have suffered the most from over policing, right? Losing the rights for some minimal stuff. We know that there are communities that suffered the most from the COVID pandemic. So many people out of work. I don't know the Jacksonville area too much, but I think that when you get closer to the water, those houses starts getting a little bit more expensive, right? It might cost a little bit more than, say, maybe around A. Philip Randolph Park, right? And so if I got a guy who lives in Mar-a-Lago, right, that he has a $5,000 fine and fee, and I have someone who lives in Belglades or Pahokee, right? Right. What area do you think do you think I'm going to see who all of the people who live in Mar-a-Lago who need help with fines and fees before I would go see about the people in Pahokee or Belglades or some other community that has just been suffering all kinds of ways economically and socially? We're gonna approach this through an equity lens. And that's the thing fluctuates, but those are the basic guiding principles. Maximize donors' dollars and help the people who are worse off.
Well, the hour is getting late. I feel like I could listen personally for hours more, and we have lots more questions, but I think the right answer is to tell everyone on this call to please visit the website. First of all, there's just a plethora of information. You can sign up, which I've already done, to get more information. It doesn't cost anything, and they will send you all kinds of updates on things and so on. But the real way to help, as Desmond has already alluded to, is to donate. This group is doing phenomenal work. I encourage you to look up on YouTube their Reimagining Justice seminar that they've held the past 2 days, brought together amazing people doing amazing things, thinking about why do we incarcerate people in the first place? For safety, but we have gotten so far off track. It's mind-boggling, but they are working really hard and they need support. And I do encourage every single person who's able to not only donate, but tell a couple friends and neighbors and family members. And my belief is that Florida is critical on a national level. I invited people from other states to watch this, and many said, did sign on, because it really has national implications, what we're talking about. So my main closing statement is just to say thank you to everyone who has given me so much of your time, giving us your time. Thank you, Mr. Meade, for all you're doing. And please know we would love to continue to help in any way that is possible.
Well, once again, I enjoyed the opportunity, and I hope something that I said would be a source of inspiration or, hope or motivation for someone on the call. And then don't forget, get the book. I'm telling you, it's a great story there. I promise you, you will enjoy the book because I've had enough reviews to now be that confident. And I would definitely, we have a bus tour going on. It's called Free to Vote Bus Tour. We're going all over the state, right? And we're going to register people to vote, sign people up for fines and fees in as many places as possible, offer the vaccine, connect with community partners to offer jobs, have free food out there and music, and celebrate democracy while we're being aggressive in getting people registered and turned out to vote. We're coming to a community. We was in Duval a couple weeks ago. We're going to come back. Tomorrow we're in the Muck. The day after we're going to be in West Palm Beach, and we're going to hit every county. This is not going to stop. We're going to continue to do it. And so if you go on our website or our Facebook page, you can track where the bus is going. And then there's an opportunity that if you have partners, that we can actually put together an event where we'll have the bus come, and we're paying people fines and fees and giving people receipts. It could be a glorious affair. The only caveat to that is that we're like the League of Women Voters, right? Where we don't engage in partisan stuff, and we really we really run a tight ship when it comes to that. If it's about turning Florida blue, we can't be a part of that, right? If it's about getting rid of DeSantis, we can't be a part of that. But if it's about creating a more inclusive democracy, oh, hell yes, we're there, right? And so there's opportunities for you to actually request the bus, and we can create events. We're having the bus the whole year, so there's no big rush, but you can pay attention to what we're doing, and we want to go in the communities that we're needed the most, and we could do something with the league, listen, we could put something together. We'll all put a little skin in the game. We could have fun and register more people and get them ready, because we do have 2022 around the corner. And some folks need to face the reckoning of their inability to put people first.
Time to get on
the bus. Is that right, Joshua?
All righty. Thank you again so much, really. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.